thank you. I guess we had an hour or so of very interesting presentations from Mr. Kim, Paul Dickerson, Dr. Yu. Those of you who were not who did not attend the morning session, let me just give you my takeaways from Chris Flavin's session this morning. Chris talked about the old economic model that had worked so well over the last 50 years, and that sort of model is not likely to work well over the next 50 years as China, India, Brazil, Indonesia move from poverty to prosperity. Is that right, Chris?
That's a very good summary.
But maybe we could start with something very topical. You know, the BP oil spill, for example. In the aftermath of, maybe we could start with Chris. In the aftermath of the BP oil spill, do you believe that we will now see some strong legislation? Is the environment now right for legislation that will facilitate clean technology?
Yes, let me just say quickly before I get to your question that I must say I was extraordinarily impressed by the description in detail of the programs that you've launched here in South Korea. I described it very briefly as part of my presentation earlier today, but hearing all of the details and hearing the vision, I must say that I didn't think I would live to see the day where an advisor to the president of a major economic power was, speaking as if he could have been a member of the research team at the World Watch Institute. I mean, it's really exciting, and to see what a comprehensive package of policies you put into place, and also the ability to bring together both government and industry to work together. And I must say, coming from Washington, where we're in the middle of a really nasty fight that looks like it may not be resolved in a positive way over energy and climate legislation, we can only envy the sort of political efficiency that you seem to have here. And I'm just extremely optimistic and really hope to come back to your country on a regular basis to just see how quickly this develops. I mean, I've been saying for some time that China has now shown that it can not only develop very quickly into these new industries, but do it 3 times as fast as the usually seen as very efficient Germans were able to do. But I'm thinking that maybe China is going to find that it's now more than met its match in terms of speed and efficiency for what you see going on here. Back to more unpleasant topics, all of this oil still pouring into the Gulf of Mexico. I think that this event has been an enormous blow to the sort of psyches, not only of Americans, but really people around the world that are watching this disaster unfold, literally on their television screens, thanks to the ability of webcams a mile under the ocean to show us these kinds of things. In the short run, I'm sad to say that it has not had a positive political impact in terms of furthering clean energy legislation. But I remain confident that I think we will look back at this as having been an important turning point. I think the sort of downsides of the final stages of the oil era are beginning to become clear. Everything from literally a war in the Persian Gulf to a oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico are so much more vivid and evident to people than climate change, which is obviously a much greater threat, but it unfolds very slowly. You have to think about future generations. It's a much more abstract concern, if you will. So I think that we will probably look back at this period that we're living in as having been a turning point that will ultimately push the world away from fossil fuels and to a clean energy economy.
I think Paul, maybe Paul could just elaborate a bit on, because you were at the Energy Department and Commerce, right?
Sure, yes, and currently live in Texas, right on the coast of the Gulf. So we're seeing lots of that. Well, one of the things that we've cautioned Americans and policymakers about this is that America often runs we often run our country reactively. In other words, instead of having a proactive vision and doing a lot of the things that you're talking about, we instead legislate reactively. And we've pointed out to Americans that America gets 30% of its oil from the Gulf. So if we just shut down operations, in other words, if we react to this national catastrophe in such a way that we just shut down operations, that's going to have a major impact on our economy. Just last month, America was importing 10 billion barrels? Well, in effect, we were shipping every day $700 million outside the U.S. to other nations. $700 million a day. That's how much energy we import. So, you know, for our nation that has a difficult time today with its budget and with jobs, we've encouraged policymakers to, before they overreact, certainly we need to figure out what occurred and make sure that it never happens again, but we need to be cognizant of not making this what was, in effect, our 3 Mile Island, which made our nation shun nuclear energy for 30 years. Right? I think we would all agree today that nuclear energy is a big part of the solution. We need to make sure that this horrible disaster in the Gulf doesn't lead us to shun offshore drilling in such a way that negatively affects our nation.
Mr. Kim, maybe you could talk about I mean, it seems to me one reason why Korea has been able to come out with its vision, and China's articulated its vision very well, is the strong leadership you have. You know, maybe you could just walk us through, because you were involved in this clean tech strategy and climate change strategy. Maybe you could just walk us through, you know, how this policy how you were able to do it so quickly and so fast, where in the U.S. it could take years before such a policy gets through. Is it strong leadership that the President is providing, the strong leadership that the Cabinet is providing?
Thank you. There are several reasons for a rather quick action, but before answering to your question, I'd like to share some thought on the British Petroleum case. The other day, the science technology advisor to the president, Mr. Holderan, who used to be a professor at Harvard University, visited my office, and I asked him what would be the outcome of the British Petroleum case, especially in the clean energy legislation. But he told me that it is working as a real wake-up call to America. America needs to get out of this kind of heavily fossil fuel oriented civilization or industry. And it is giving very strong signal to American people for a change. But what is ironical is that the Republicans are now being more united than ever before for sustaining this kind of status. So he's not so sure about the outcome of the legislation this year. But he pointed out 3 reasons why America will make a real change. First, American people are witnessing Katrina and this time BP, this kind of fossil fuel related disasters, climate disasters. They are witnessing big disasters, and it's a real signal. Secondly, American voters do not want candidates who doesn't have any green agenda. So if you want to be a good president, if you want to be a real successful candidate, you need to have a green agenda. So now it is very natural for every political leaders to have green agenda. That's a big change. Thirdly, American business and American government are now looking at directly the potential of green business. So it is green is, as someone put it, green is green. So even Republicans are now recognizing the new opportunities for green growth or clean paradigm. So that's why U.S. will make a real change. And the first time for the two leaders, I mean President Obama and President Lee Myung-bak met together at the G20 London Summit 2 years ago, 1.5 years ago. The first comment, the first saying hello to President Lee Myung-bak by President Obama was, "I heard about your green new story. It was great endeavor, and I'm going to do that." That was, those two leaders have something in common in terms of green. So it is a big change, and I see President Obama is really determined to go forward. He finally made the healthcare reform, and it seems to me he now moved on to the kind of rather global agenda. For example, free trade agreement and climate agenda. He's trying to be a very big leader, not only domestic area, but also global arena. So I'm waiting for that happen. and about China. In the negotiation table, in the climate change related negotiation table, Chinese people seem to be very reluctant or reserved for change. But it's just for the purpose of negotiation. And it is about their sovereignty for any kind of concession. But inside, they really move quickly. I think faster than Korea. Just for themselves. To, you know, I heard that the energy demand will be double up by the year of 2030, and most of them will because of China and India. For their own demand, they are moving very fastly, and they are developing clean energy technologies with a very rapid manner. So we must see the two sides of China at one time. And about Korea, as I said, climate impact is very evident. I really mean it. The last winter was very cold, and this summer will be very hot. We used to have a clear cut for seasons, but not anymore. The other day I had a dinner with the U.S. Ambassador Stevenson here. She she once lived in Korea 20 years ago, or 30 years ago. She loved that clear cut for seasons. But she uttered that she cannot experience that kind of beautiful four seasons anymore. She totally agreed with my observation. So climate impact is very evident. And then, as I said, energy security is a real issue. 2 years ago, when the oil pickup hit again, we had to spend more than 1,400, no, sorry. 140 billion US dollars to import energy. That's way beyond all the exports. I mean, if we sum up the semiconductor exports, auto exports, shipbuilding exports, we cannot afford our energy bill. So that's a real issue. And once again, and we need to find a new growth engine. We are experiencing, as I said, jobless growth. So it was very desperate to find a new growth engine which can create jobs. And Mr. President, considering all these factors, proclaimed the so-called green, low-carbon green growth vision at the 60th anniversary ceremony of the birth of Republic of Korea. As I mentioned, it meant really a lot. But that was not enough. We had to go through more than 80 times for consensus building. That is very important. Yeah.
In 2000, late 1990s, just after the Asian financial crisis, Korea moved fairly quickly into technology areas, broadband, telecommunications. Is the push towards green, clean technology, is this sort of, I mean, because you were so successful with broadband and telecommunication, are you doing this because of that, or?
Oh, well, in a sense, we have a kind of action-oriented DNA,
Right.
if I may say that way. But if there is one condition, that direction should be right and get consensus. In 1990s, we need to kind of make a kind of exit, a new breakthrough. That many people believe that it is a crazy investment. It may create a IT boom, but it ended up with a good success through tough competition. And these days, according to the recent surveys done by Department of Knowledge Economy, the amount of investment on green sector among 30 largest companies in Korea are well beyond the 2 billion, 20 billion, yeah, 20 trillion won. I'm always confusing when it comes to dollar and won, but 20 billion won. It's amazing. They measure in a very conservative way, so they have decided to go for another venture, right?
Maybe Paul talked about in his presentation. Paul talked about the need to focus on commercialization. My question to you, maybe Paul, you could elaborate on: is there enough capital available for clean tech in the post-crisis world, and how can we get better financial incentives in place to facilitate more investments in clean tech?
Sure. It's important, I think, for any nation, certainly the U.S. and others, to design policy which incents the private sector to move, right? And we tried several things with our own Stimulus Act. One was just a grant of billions of dollars out in a finite period of time. The other was to design certain tax policy. And if you look at what seemed to really move the market, there were a few things. One, the Congress had designed what's called a Treasury grant. The concept is only that instead of giving a tax credit to a company, well, if the company doesn't make a profit, they can't use their credit, but the Treasury would instead, once they are up and running, give them a grant of 30% of whatever the total cost was. That moved the market. You also saw manufacturing tax credits. That moved the market. It required companies to actually move before they were rewarded, where a lot of the stimulus grant money was delivered or at least allocated, and then the movement began. So that was one piece. But when it comes to designing the right policy and making sure that you have the right money, one of the things that we put forth, and it continues to gain traction, is something that we call the Clean Energy Bank. But there's this private or a public bank institution called the Overseas Private Investment Corporation, which maybe is kind of inside baseball to talk. But it's a government institution which will give you a loan guarantee, and insurance that your customers will pay you. The problem is in the U.S., that institution will only fund projects in developing countries. Right? So if you wanted to do if you wanted to create a solar manufacturing plant, our government would give you all of those things, but you had to promise us that you would not build it anywhere within our borders. That, to us, seems bad policy. So this Clean Energy Bank is, in effect, the same type institution, but it would fund clean energy projects within our borders. That seems to answer a lot of the concerns in the market and seems to provide some stability that would move it. So I think the money is there, but we have to give the right certainty to the market so that they will move.
What about the private sector? Is there money from private equity? You work with a lot
Absolutely.
with venture capital and private equity. What about the private sector? Is there money available, or private equity investors willing to put money down for long-term projects?
It's a longer answer, and I'm going to give you the short answer, and then we can dig deeper if you like. But you know, as I'm sure the audience knows, you have early stage investors and you have later stage investors. Earlier stage investors invest a little bit of money because it's very risky. Later stage investors invest a lot of money, billions, but the technology risk has to be virtually zero. So today, the venture capital, so the early stage investors, have been investing for some period of time, but they've been unable to have an exit, take their companies public, or sell them, or do something so that they get their money back as investors. So that has slowed that early stage investing. The private equity, the bigger investors, are still concerned about some of the technology risk associated with clean tech, so they have been slow to act. You're right, there are billions and billions of dollars sitting on the sideline waiting to move, but until we lessen that technology risk, get over the commercialization valley of death that I spoke of, we will never be able to catalyze that private sector investment. Chris?
Right. Chris, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, the thing I wanted to add is that I think while there certainly are instances where, you know, specific government assistance with financing can be essential and helpful, the most fundamental thing in order to allow financing to go into these new industries is to have a fundamentally strong policy framework that creates a market. And so, you know, you don't find that countries like, you know, Germany being a very good example really has to spend a lot of, you know, government effort figuring out ways to help finance projects, because the policy fundamentals are there so that these are financeable projects, because a banker can easily look at a solar project or a wind project or a bioenergy project and know that there will be a revenue stream to, in effect, pay back the financing that was put on the table. And interestingly, and I think this is, it's sort of a detail, but I think it's a really important detail, there is a clear trend in the world away from renewable portfolio standards and towards electricity feed-in laws. And the reason is that these are much more financeable projects. Bankers will tell you they love electricity feed-in laws because they can easily pull out a spreadsheet and know what the revenue stream is going to be over the next 20 years. Whereas if you are in a country without a feed-in law but just a renewable portfolio standard, all you can do is go to the bank and say, I'm going to put a bid into my local utility and hope that I win the bid. And the bank's going to look at you and say, I'm not giving you any money. There's no guarantee you're actually going to be successful. One small thing I would sort of quarrel with in describing the RPS versus the electricity feed-in law is that I think the electricity feed-in law is actually much more market-oriented. The RPS is actually creating a cartel run by the electric utility, and you've basically got a lot of small producers trying to get into a market that's controlled by a monopoly company. The electricity feed-in law gets rid of all of that. Now, the fundamental question, of course, is what at what level is the price going to be set. And you've got to have some very good mechanism to get the price right. You don't want to have it too high. You don't want to have it too low. You've got to have a way of adjusting that on a regular, probably annual basis so that it, in fact, it is market responsive. If the cost of solar comes down, then the market price provided by the electricity feed-in law should come down as well. But to be successful in this new clean energy era, we need to open the market space so that all kinds of new companies, startup companies, electronics companies, others can get into the energy business. And to have that happen, you have to have really good reform of the electricity laws to really open things up. And I think if you do that, you will find that financing is actually relatively easy to find, at least once we get past the financial crisis.
Dr.
Okay, I have a question to Mr. Dickerson. Well, the investment depends on the prospect of commercial rate of return, right? So I see it's just a $2 carbon price in U.S. Instead of, the European market is 16 euro. It's a very low carbon price. So I think its commercial rate of return depends on the carbon price, I guess. Am I right? And also, you said the government role is to help the commercialization, and then if the government give the industry the money, then how the regulatory regime to prevent some market corruption or the market distortion, something like that, because the government help the industry, right? Then there may be some company exploit does subsidy, a kind of subsidy, right? Then is there any ideas to prevent those kind of market corruption? Yeah, there's two questions.
Sure, absolutely. The one thing that I think generally people agree is that the higher the cost of fossil fuels, the more viable the renewable alternative, right? And that's why you have several people in the U.S. say, well, if we do what they've done in Europe and tax the fossil fuels to such an extent that it's so painful for consumers to have high energy costs, then they will need to switch to the alternative. Same way on if you price carbon, that will increase the cost of the fossil fuel, thereby making the alternative more viable. One of the things that, of course, our core function when I was at the Department of Energy was to invest $2 billion every year, which today they're now investing $5 billion every year. But the purpose of that money is to try and improve or lessen the cost of the alternative energy, of both the renewables and the efficiency, right? So the LED lighting or the siding or the windows or things like that. So to your point on carbon, absolutely. And one of the things that, and Chris could probably talk better on the policy side of carbon in the U.S., but we as a nation are struggling, and I think both Republicans and Democrats are united in their concerns of what a higher energy cost would do to our nation that's trying to work out of a recession. So that seems to be what's holding back a lot of the carbon legislation. I don't think that there's a very real chance in the U.S. this year that we'd have carbon legislation. You'll likely have legislation, extending some tax credits and maybe doing this green bank or some other things in the U.S. But it'll be small, primarily because it's a political year, and you have many in Congress who are ready to get home and make sure they get reelected, but they're also busy. On the corruption side, it's important, and it was important when I was in government to make sure that you have systems set up which don't allow for that corruption. And I think President Obama and his staff and his team have done an extraordinary job trying to keep the lobbyist influence to a minimum. It is Washington, and it's been there a while, and there's some that will always be trying to navigate around that. But from what I saw being on the inside and what I've seen of what they're trying to do now, they do a great job. What they need to do in the U.S. is listen much more closely to my friend Chris at World Watch and a lot of his colleagues that are really the think tanks behind a lot of the proper policy for the United States. I'm sorry?
Is there any monitoring system in the US?
Well, there is. When the government gives out money, all of that money is given out in a public way, so that people can hold others accountable. I tell you again, what we need, and we talked about this a little over lunch, we need more companies like yours getting involved in being part of the solution. The reason I moved to Texas, deep in the heart of our nation's dirty energy country, is because I think the only way clean, new energy will be successful is if they learn the lessons and partner with traditional companies. So I think your company's involvement in this clean energy space is going to move the needle much more quickly and much better than, honestly, than government could do. It's what our government can do to try and make sure that you get involved. And that's one of the things that for our nation, the concern is that, I don't know if you're familiar with Robin Hood, kind of steal from the rich and give to the poor, right? I think American policy that steals from the oil and gas companies and gives to the clean tech companies is the wrong policy. We need to find ways, whatever major company decide that they wanted to get involved, that's what we as policymakers in the U.S. need to be trying to do. We need our nation's finest, like you, to be part of the solution.
Yeah, maybe Mr. Yu talked about the national policy. Maybe Mr. Yu, you could talk about the carbon market, carbon trade. I know that Korea wants to be a financial hub. Do you have a policy on carbon trading? You have a framework for carbon market going in Korea at some point soon?
Well, actually, Korean government is considering, very cautiously, considering introducing carbon trading emission scheme. But it should reflect the specific situation we face here in Korea. But by the law of the basic framework for green growth, we have a legal ground to pursue emission trading scheme. But we need another law to make it really happen. So we are considering doing some kind of pilot project. And then what the essence of cap and trade or emission trading scheme is how to put price on carbon. And that's the real answer. Carbon pricing is the best incentive or disincentive for change. But it's very tough. But at this moment, we are trying to rationalize or realize the price of gas and oil in Korea. Some of them are subsidized. And one of the major outcomes of the G20 summit in Toronto was the agreement that every nation would phase out the fossil fuel subsidy in a gradual manner. That's a big move. All these things will be integrated. But what worries me is that we need a kind of certain scale of market globally if we really see the positive outcome of the emission trading scheme. But in that sense, we are waiting for a move from US, from Australia, from a lot of countries. But internally, we are trying to prepare for the change. And I cannot be more agreeable to what Mr. Dickerson said about the role of the government as a consumer. It is really good. And in that regard, Korea is going to announce a green procurement plan next week. when we have the 8th Green Presidential Committee Conference on Green Growth, that will be 8th. So that we will talking about the green. We will be announce our green procurement plan. That's going to give another clear signal to the business community. And what else did you ask? It's okay, right?
Maybe, Mr. Kim, maybe.
But in the end, as I said in my presentation, government cannot do it alone, and it is ultimately marketplace, where private sector, right. So private-public partnership, right.
Add one thought in terms of carbon pricing. I think that almost anyone who's looked seriously at these issues understands that putting a price on carbon can make an enormous difference. It gives a real signal to the marketplace. I think one thing that's often neglected, though, is that the cap-and-trade approach is not the only option here. And in fact, you've got really a number of governments around the world now that have introduced carbon taxes, which I think, in principle, are really a much simpler, cleaner way of getting a price. You don't have, government bureaucrats or politicians figuring out who gets the credits and then giving away the money to favored industries. You simply put, usually, at least initially, a very small tax on carbon. Ideally, you very, very gradually raise it over time. Say, what is our 10-year program of gradually increasing? That will give the industry a very clear signal and will avoid the kind of economic shock that you get from suddenly adding a price. India, interestingly, recently announced unilaterally, getting almost no attention after Copenhagen, that it's going to put a significant tax on coal, which is a mainly domestic, in fact, it's the only really large domestic fossil fuel that India has. And I think it's a very interesting sort of signal of a trend that may be coming along. And if you look at the way in which the very substantial increase that we've seen in the price of oil and indeed in other fossil fuels over the last 5 years, and the impact that's had. By the way, it's equivalent in terms of oil to about $80 to $100 a ton is the amount of increase in market prices that we've seen, much larger than any national parliament would actually be able to pass. And that price signal is actually one of the major reasons we see so much momentum in these markets. I mean, sure, there is a lot of good government policy that's playing a role as well, but don't underestimate the impact that market signals can have. And I think one of the arguments for carbon tax is that, in fact, will reduce the vulnerability of most economies to additional oil price shocks in the future.
That's right, Mr. Palaman. As we are crossing uncharted water, I don't think we have a perfect answer. But what is important, we move together, reflecting each nation, each company, each individual's capability and situation. But what is important, we move together in the same direction. Right.
My own takeaway from this session is that Korea, China, some of the Asian countries are showing very, very strong leadership. Unlike some of the Western countries, they, because of their processes or systems and bickering, they haven't been able to show the kind of leadership that Korea has shown. And as we saw after the 1997-98 crisis, Koreans are go-getters. They can overcome. 12 years ago, they adopted the IT, broadband network, and stuff like that. And this time around, in the aftermath of this current global crisis, they've adopted clean technology as their savior. But thank you very much for attending this session and participating. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.